And we're back.
And we're back. And we're back after being, like everybody else, quarantine, pandemic, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Sheesh, man.
We're still here.
We're still here.
And I'm not on fire. The rest of California is, but I'm not.
Yeah, I'm glad I don't live in California now. But how are you, Jody? You good?
I mean,
let's just pretend like everything's amazing.
It's fantastic.
Everybody's going through this, but overall, I mean, you're doing all right. I mean, overall,
yeah. I mean,
your family's good.
Family's great. We can drive to the beach.
Yeah,
it's good.
It's good.
Smoke is in the air. Smoke is in the air. Ash is falling. The sun looks like the apocalypse is near.
Jody lives in California, by the way. That's Jody Livingston. He's a student pastor out in California. I'm Chris Trent. I'm a student pastor in Marietta, Georgia, right outside of Atlanta, and
suburb of Dallas.
Suburb. Yeah, okay.
Inside joke. Listeners will know.
Inside joke for regulars will know. It's been a while, but hey, everybody, it's been a while for everything, and we don't need to explain it all. We just been trying to figure things out, but a guy by the name of Dr. Tim Elmore came out with this amazing book called The Pandemic Population, and as soon as it came out, I started reaching out and trying to pull some strings, and we were able to get Dr. Tim Elmore on to come talk about this thing, and it's a ridiculously amazing. So if there's one that we're going to come back on, it's this one. It's amazing.
And I would say it's
such
awesome.
a good interview. Jiminy Crickets is good.
I would say it's awesome, but I feel like he kind of towards the end you're
gonna have to listen to the podcast to understand why you're making that joke.
Yeah,
you realize that, right?
I can't say it's awesome, but it was very, very good.
Yeah,
the book is great.
The book really is good, and I think after you hear the interview, you'll want to hear from this guy.
The book's great for a number of reasons that we'll get to. I mean, when you hear the interview, you'll understand why. The content is fantastic, but it's an easy read. Like, it's a compelling read. It pulls you along. It's not like, some books are really, really great and super helpful, but you kind of have to grind through them. This one, man.
This was good.
No, it's so easy. So easy.
So hey, to our youth pastor friends out there, to our longer haulers, man, hang in there. We love you. We're trying to hang in there too, and it's not the end of the world. I believe that. And there's going to be some awesome stuff through this thing, I believe. So hang in there. And we're trying to get back on a regular schedule. We've got a couple things planned. That's pretty awesome. So we're trying to put out some content again and get back after it. So, yeah.
Yep. And as always, super grateful for folks who do help us make this happen. Our friends over at YM360.
We still have sponsors, believe it or not.
YM360 is our huge friends, partners for us in ministry. And man, as always, super thankful for all that those guys do and are working on and putting out. So head over to YM360.
They have pivoted really well. Like, they've done a great job pivoting and producing content that's very relevant to what we're going through. Yes. So check them out if you're not doing that already.
Indeed, you can use the promo longer haul, save yourself some money on that. And then AirOSport.fun, fantastic game. Still, I mean, it's still, I have played it recently because I have nothing else to do, stuck at home, and super fun game. AirOSport.fun. Be sure to head over and check out that as well, especially as you are beginning to regather with students. Introduce something new. You can use a promo code there as well. And then we have a new sponsor.
How in the world did we get a new sponsor in the midst of all this and having not done a podcast in months? I don't know, but we do. And here's why. Because I have a really good friend by the name of Barrett Johnson who runs this little organization called Info for Families. Info for Families. Fabulous website, fabulous blogging this guy does. He has lots of great resources for parenting teenagers. So here's what we're talking, folks. Don't miss this. He can help you do parent ministry. He's got some great resources, and in particular, specifically, the one that we're promoting and that he's helping us by sponsoring is this really amazing video series that he's designed for parents called Smartphones 101. Long story short, here's the quick version of it. Smartphones 101, online course for families and their teens, designed to tee up some meaningful conversations about smartphones with wisdom, right? So parents struggle. When do I get a smartphone? What are the rules we need to set? He goes through and he does these 10 short video lessons. They're only about 7 minutes each, to cover all the family rules, the things you should do. This is an amazing resource that you could get and utilize with your parents. You could do this in a couple of ways. You could, number one, just make it available to your parents, or two, you could get it and actually do like a Sunday night gathering of some sort. You could do it over Zoom. Lots of ways you could do this thing. Trust me, it's good. Here's why I know it's good, Jody. You want to know the truth? Because he's going to listen to this. Because he stole most of my stuff when he read it. That's the truth.
I think when he was on the podcast, we hashed that out.
We covered that when he was on the podcast. We talked about that. I'm glad
you've gotten over it. That your bitterness
is gone,
and that
I'm not over it. I should have made a video series about it. But thankfully, he's sponsoring me now. All that to say this,
smarter than you.
Yeah. All to say this, 2 great offers for student pastors. One, you can use the promo code. There's a promo code.
We like
Longer
those.
haul. You get 25% off the retail price. 25% off the retail price. And not only that, here's the deal. If you promote this to your parents, you can become like an affiliate, and he's actually going to give you a little cut. Now you got to do that the appropriate way there. And you might even do a thing where I might would recommend maybe saying, hey, that's going to go to the budget or something like that. But you do what you want. All that to say, all that information is simply right here. Go to smartphones-101, smartphones-101.com. Check it out. Barrett Johnson. And he's going to be on an episode real soon. And we're going to talk about it a little bit more, but really we're going to talk about some other stuff because he's got a great mind when it comes to parenting and teenagers, because he's a former youth pastor at Bleeds Youth Ministry. So check it out.
It's a really relevant timing for that, because that even comes out in today's interview. We talk about that a little with Dr. Elmore.
Totally does. Smartphones-101.com. Check it out.
Woohoo. Well, should we jump in?
Oh, so good. Let's do it. Here we go, everybody. Buckle up, because hold on. Time.
See, they were all ready to go, and then
I know, but listen, this is
brakes.
Important. You're going to want something to write with on this one. Tell me I'm wrong, Jody.
No, yeah, definitely you're going to.
Okay,
there's a few moments where he's literally going to lay out for you some helpful things to take to parents and to students as
just
you're processing.
Get something to write with if you're listening in your car or on your motorcycle or
Mister, I finally got a motorcycle. Now look at him.
Dropped a little motorcycle bomb there. So listen, you're gonna want to take notes on this, and trust me. All right, there we go. Here we go. Dr. Tim Elmore, aka Tim. Well, we're super excited. Welcome, Dr. Tim Elmore, to the show, man. Tim, we're so glad that you've joined us today. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Jody.
Well, hey, we're excited about the book that you have out, The Pandemic Population, and Jody and I both have been reading it, and I've got about a chapter or two left. I'm going to be honest up front with you on it, but I've read most of it, at least, which is pretty good for me, right, Jody? Jody, you don't like when I confess that more than most.
No, that's
yeah. But that said, here's the thing. Love it, especially how quick you got it out and everything. But talk about the heart, I guess, just kind of start out. What's the heart part behind that? And you know what? Before we do that, actually, let's talk about who you are. If you could give us kind of a quick introduction to your background, and then maybe jump into why you wrote the book.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for the conversation today. It's great to be with you guys. I actually started as a youth pastor and a teacher, a high school teacher. So I was doing both of those, 40 years ago. So it was a long time ago. In 1983, I went on staff with John Maxwell. And so my love of students, my love of leadership.
John Maxwell, is he like an author or something? I'm trying to remember, but I'm just kidding. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yes, he's kind of like an author.
Yeah, I think he did some books or something. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, one a month, I think. Anyway, in 2003, I started a nonprofit called Growing Leaders, and it really is a nonprofit that partners with churches, schools, universities, athletic programs, wherever kids are, to really equip the adult leader to know how to connect with Generation Z. And then also we use habitudes, these images that start conversations for the students themselves. And it's all about social emotional learning, leadership, character. I am a man of faith. Our whole team is, but most of our work, 80% of our work is with public schools. And so we love what we get to do, but that's
great.
Yeah.
Man, that's fabulous that you're able to do that with the public. That's awesome. That's good.
Yeah.
Well, how about the book? So, pandemic population. Yeah. Obviously, we're going through a pandemic. Most people listening to this are probably going to be listening to it right in the midst of, we're still going through it. Yeah. So, man, talk about the heart behind this thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you and I both know we were already seeing mental health issues in middle school, high school, and college kids, like ridiculous. In fact, even elementary school kids. We would talk to faculty and they'll go, yeah, our second graders are just full of angst and they're stressed out. And I'm going, man, they should be wondering where the kickball is, So we saw that already prior to the pandemic. Mid-March of 2020, when we saw that everybody was sent home and we saw what a struggle it was for parents and teachers to manage this remote learning and the virtual graduation, the lack of a prom, all that stuff that was happening. I just knew I needed to just hunker down and do some research and create a resource that would help the caring adults that love these kids but aren't quite sure how to help them navigate. They have to be a therapist right now, Chris and Jody. It's just, it's just a different day. So one last quick note on this. The first thing I did that really prompted the book was I went back and studied history. What did people do in past pandemics? What did we learn from that? What good came from that? And what did the adults do for the kids, as much as we could dig up, that would inform us today? Like, for instance, I interviewed a whole bunch of Great Depression kids.
Yes.
People
that part of the book is awesome.
That's
like the first couple of chapters. That what you're talking about right now is one of the. I love that part because you go back, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, wait a second.
Yeah,
we're not the first ones to ever go through something like this before.
That's right.
And what's beautiful is you're able to weave that back in throughout the rest of the book as well, and it builds on top of that. So that part is awesome, incredible.
Well, thanks. All that to say, I was really catalyzed, I think, to do this book when I found out the adults during that Great Depression led those kids so well. By and large, there were some exceptions, but those kids came out with grit and resilience and a desire to grow and maybe be an entrepreneur. My dad was an entrepreneur. My dad turns 90 this year, and he is a product of the Great Depression, says it was the greatest years of his life, but I think it was because he was led well during that tough time. So my hope is we can do it again today.
Now, you wrote it really, really fast. It feels like this is one of the faster projects you've ever done. And I guess did it kind of build on things that you had already been working on before, or was there something already in the works? How'd you knock that out so fast?
Yeah. Well, like I said, it did build off of what we were already seeing. The mental health issues.
Yes, of course.
People of faith and people that aren't people of faith both have realized we've got to figure this out. I think mental health is the unpaid bill of the 21st century in America. We have not figured out we were ambushed by the smartphone. We did not know what it would do to us. And are there good things about it? Of course there are good things about it, but we didn't know what it would do to the anxiety, the depression, the panic attacks. So I was already stewing on that. And then this just said, okay, forget it. We're going to town on this. So I'm hoping it's helpful and relevant to people when they read it, to get a little, the whole point is 8 strategies. What can we do to lead these kids to the other side of this COVID-19 thing with hope and resilience and lots of faith in the future?
I think it's worth pointing out, and you can maybe weigh in on this off the front, because one of the things that I keep finding, whether I'm talking to student pastors or parents, everybody has an opinion about the pandemic itself, right? Yeah. And that's not, like, we're not here. That really doesn't matter in this conversation in terms of what you feel or how serious or not. The reality is that whether or not you think it's serious or you don't, the result and the effects that it's having on this generation are profound, and seem to be like we just keep finding other things that this generation is struggling with as a result of being confined and being separated, and the angst and the unknown of all of that.
No doubt about it. In fact, the big $64,000 question is, do we side with their physical health and keep them safe, or do we side with their mental health and keep them home? or let them get out.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you guys saw this, but the CDC just made a report. Over the last 30 days, 1 in 4 young adults have contemplated suicide in the last month.
I saw that yesterday, I think.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, in case there's somebody out there going, I don't think it's a big deal. You're right. It doesn't matter whether you think it's a big deal. It is to the mindset of a kid and to a student, and we've got to figure out a way to lead them out of this well.
Well, and that statistic alone was staggering. I mean, we already saw that. I think I'd seen previously, 5% of teenagers at any given point were struggling with mild depression.
Yeah.
And that was before pandemic.
Yeah.
And so to go, even with that in mind, to where we find ourselves today, it escalated really, really quickly, it feels like.
Yeah, no doubt about it. In fact, many of the high school students that I talk to, they're using words like, I feel like I'm postponed. I feel like I'm penalized. And even though they don't blame any one person for sure, that's the feeling they've got. And again, I know there's a balance between empathy and, okay, suck it up, let's go. You got to grow up now. But we've got to find that middle ground of both grace and truth. It's, this is hard for sure, but we can do this. Let's go. So,
so my oldest is a senior this year.
Oh, wow.
And so we were a couple weeks ago, she said to me in the car, she said, everybody was worried about last year's seniors. They lost their prom, they lost their graduation, but at least they got to go to class. Like
exactly.
I may end up having nothing. I mean, this may be the whole, and so trying to lead through that as a parent in those conversations is hard. It's hard.
Tim, I'm curious what, you did start out, and I think you talk about this a little bit in the book. I'm curious, how would you describe for folks listening what's changed? Because one of the things when you talk about the Great Depression kids, you talk about how they say they didn't realize they were going through at the time, but something's changed. Would you, I felt like you were saying that in the book in the sense that this current generation though is fully aware. Is that fair?
No doubt about it. Yeah. And not the least of which the source is social media. So when I was 12 years old, my biggest problem was, how do I find a girlfriend and where's my baseball mitt? And now they're just aware of the riots in Portland and the fires in California, Jody, and I think it's adult information coming at them so rapidly. And I do believe cognitively they might be ready, but emotionally and socially, I don't know that they're ready. I don't know that their hearts are ready to take in what they're taking in. So
we're barely ready, right? I mean, in some ways, we feel like we're barely ready. I mean, the adults, the parents, even in my own, I mean, everybody's struggling. So it's tough.
Yeah.
You say that a pandemic is a terrible thing to waste. I'm quoting you.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
Well, it's easy.
I think I get it, but I'm just so that our listeners can hear that. Yeah.
Thank you for the great question to set me up here. That chapter was all about what if we could see this differently? So we live in a cancel culture, and I think a bunch of our culture in America would like to cancel 2020, just the whole year.
I'm so bad. I'm so over 2020.
Yeah. But that chapter is all about, let's look at what we could do if we saw this differently. So what if 2020 was a wake-up call for all of us?
Yeah.
And we're all in a bit of a stupor. When things are going well, we're not on our knees as much. We're not, fighting to find God. And so I tell the story in that chapter. In fact, if you don't mind, I want to tell it now. It's such a fun story.
Yeah, please do.
So back in 1665, it was the tail end of the Black Death. It was a pandemic that Europe went through for centuries, not decades, centuries. And back in 1665, Isaac Newton was a university student at Cambridge University. He was 22 years old, and this great plague of London, which was part of the Black Death, happened. People were dying. And so Cambridge sent all their students home. It was kind of their own version of social distancing. Well, when Isaac Newton gets home to the farmhouse, he could have just vegged and relaxed like most of the students were doing. But he decided, wow, without Cambridge telling me what to do and driving what I study and how I study, I'm going to do this on my own now. So Isaac Newton just starts, he invents calculus while he's at home during this quarantine that he's going through. We might not have that course had he not gone through this, great plague of London.
Which might not have been. I mean,
I was going to say that doesn't sound like a terrible.
That doesn't sound terrible to me.
Curse, isn't it? Yeah.
Dang, Black Plague. Blame it on the plague.
Good things and bad things happen during pandemics. Yes. But secondly, really kind of cool. He got his hands on a prism and bore a hole in the shutter of his window and started coming up with his theories on optics, which we still use to this day. And then lastly, that proverbial apple fell from the tree that we all heard about in school. And he came up with the laws of motion and the law of gravity, all while he was an early 20-something away in a pandemic. Well, a year later, he goes back to Cambridge, theories in hand. And within 6 months, he's made a fellow. Within another year, he's a full-on professor. And I would say he didn't waste a pandemic. So what if we could help our students say, since nobody's there like they used to be to tell you how to handle this time or that time or whatever, with all that free time or with the extra free time, what could you do? How could you practice metacognition where you figure out what you're going to study, how you're going to study it, and what conclusions you're going to draw? This could be that we see the greatest Gen Z discoveries. And we all look back and say, you know what? It was that crazy year 2020 when we went forward so fast because nobody was telling them what to do. Wouldn't that be cool?
That would be awesome. So since we're talking to youth pastors,
yep,
your audience right now is definitely youth pastors. You were a youth pastor. You've had teenagers. If I remember reading the book,
yep.
I mean, you've raised kids.
Yep.
What encouragement would you give to youth pastors? I say encouragement. I mean, what would it, maybe advice would be better what I'm asking. What advice would you give to youth pastors as far as what we should be focusing on right now?
Yeah.
I think we want to come back in a minute. I think Jody may have a question related to parenting, which is a little bit different in some ways. But from a youth pastor, like I'm a youth pastor, I'm trying to get things back going again. I'm running into kids. What advice would you give?
Yeah, great. That's a great question. Well, first of all, if you're a result-oriented personality as a youth pastor, and you're wondering what these kids, these lazy bums, what are they doing? Let me just say the obvious. We've got to lead with empathy because we don't know what kind of anguish is going on inside. Even if they're posting silly stuff on TikTok, on the inside, it might be that they're really struggling and they're just hiding behind that silly post. So I would say three things real quick to a youth pastor. Kids need three gifts during a disruption like this. The first one is context. I think we do well to a young teenager to say, let me give you context on this. And by the way, by context, I mean, give them a sense of history for instance, you might say, this is a really hard time, but did you know this is the fourth pandemic we've gone through in the last century? It is. And each time while people did die, and that was awful, some of the greatest vaccines and discoveries and inventions happened. So you give them a sense of, okay, this is not the first time. So context offers perspective. The second gift I think that kids need, that students need, is applications. When we go through a disruption and we're feeling anguish, we often get flooded and we feel overwhelmed. And what do I do? And the amygdala kicks in our brain and we're going fight or flight, fight or flight. We're not thinking logically. So good leaders offer clear, actionable steps, applications. This offers clarity to them. What they're really needing most in this time when things are really weird and ambiguous is clarity. So even though you can't say a lot in this time because you don't have clarity on a lot, but you got clarity on a little bit, share the little bit. Here's what you got to do this week, guys. And you offer those clear, actionable steps. The third gift, which probably is obvious to every youth pastor in the country, they need belief. And not just faith in God, for sure about that, but they need to know you believe in them. So be authentic, don't make this up, but they need to hear you say, you know what, this is hard, but I believe we're not only going to make it through, we're going to be stronger than ever. We're going to be a brush fire, not a candle. We're not going to be put out quickly. We're going to get stronger with the winds. Jody, you understand this? You're in California right now.
Yeah.
The fires are stronger when the winds are stronger. That's how we got to be. So anyway, all that to say, context, applications, and belief. This is going to sound cheesy now, guys, but they spell the word CAB if it's an acronym. And so every morning when I get up, I tell myself before I lead my team, I got to get in the cab if I'm going to get to my destination, got to get in the cab. So I remember context applications of belief are what good leaders offer people, especially students during these times.
Oh, that's super helpful, I think, because I think a lot of youth pastors probably find themselves feeling similar to the student in the sense that, because I mean, and Chris and I have talked about this a lot in the sense that, I mean, student ministry has been canceled, right? I mean, the things that like the normal summer events, mission trips and camps and all of that gone. So all of that relational time that you normally have, and depending on where you are, even right now, serving and what the limitations are, like some of that's still gone. So I think as a student pastor, a lot of student pastors are struggling like, man, okay, how do I even, we're having to reinvent. And this is, I think, a good thing, not a bad thing, but reinvent some of what we're doing. So
yeah, no doubt about it. It's so true.
Let's transition maybe then. Jody, you were thinking about parents there for a minute earlier.
Yeah. So I think we're all finding ourselves in conversations with parents and with students. Parents are struggling with how to guide these conversations, and they have varying opinions of what is important and what is not. Especially maybe in a culture where education has been seen for so long now as kind of the most important pinnacle.
Yeah.
And that's all been blown up, and
it's so true. Yeah.
How I mean, what kind of advice would you give to a student pastor who's trying to lead that conversation with parents? And maybe even to frame that, I even give them like a young student pastor.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So or not a parent probably themselves, or if they are very small kids who's having to really step in now and try to speak to parents who are parenting teens.
It's a huge question. In fact, what's going through my mind right now is how divided the high school students or middle school students see the adult population right now. We've got an election year. We got protests going on. People are divided about that. We got a pandemic, and we're divided about that. Should we wear a mask? Should we not wear a mask? So I think it's going to be important for that youth pastor to interface with parents and say, whatever we do, let's come together and have a united front in leading these kids. We're not going to agree on everything, but these students need to see adults get along. I mean, that seems like a fundamental, but to be civil. And sometimes in the church, there's not civility. So that would be big idea number one. We can camp out there if you want, but here's what I would say. Youth pastors, I would share a handful of items with those moms and dads who are probably struggling right now themselves emotionally, and maybe their venting comes out on you because they're not quite sure what to do. So here's a handful of ideas that I think are really, really helpful for moms and dads that you might share. Feel free to steal. Number one, always cover personal items before work items. During a time where they're doing remote learning or they're still kind of feeling weird and strange about this pandemic, I think if they know you care most about their personal well-being and you're voicing that, they'll get to the schoolwork, they'll get to the homework, they'll get to the chores that need to be done. But personal before work. With my team, I've got a team of a bunch of 20-somethings and 30-somethings. I've got to lean in and say, are you guys okay? I just want to make sure you're okay. And I need to mean it. But if I do that, I think they're going to lean in and say, okay, thanks for caring for me. Now I'll care about the work that needs to get done. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah.
Secondly, I think we need to have hard conversations before easy ones. So this is counterintuitive. Whenever we got good news and bad news to share, we always want to jump to the good news first because, we want people happy, not sad. But I think we need to say, let me share the hard stuff first, then go to the easy stuff. Let me tell you what happens in high schoolers if we don't do this, especially skeptics, and they exist among adolescents. Start thinking you're a spin doctor. If you're not sharing the hard stuff, they're going, what are you hiding? You're a spin doctor here, So I think jump right in and say, listen, guys, here's the deal. We have more infections this month. What we need to do is XYZ, ABC, but do the hard. Then you get to go to the easy stuff. I tell you who's actually done this well is Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York. If you remember when the pandemic broke in April and May, he was on the air nationally because New York was struggling so much. And while I don't agree with everything Andrew Cuomo does, he handled the press conferences so well because it was hard before easy, hard before easy, hard before easy. And he really became across believable. We've got to do that too. Last thing, big picture before smaller details. So very often we as youth, student pastors, or parents are just jumping into the details and we get all frazzled because the details aren't being taken care of. I actually think your kids need to see the box top to the puzzle before we give them the puzzle. So they're wondering where their piece fits. But if you'll say, hey, let me show you the box top, and you show them the big picture, here, there's that context thing again. Then you can go back and say, all right, here's where your puzzle piece fits in. So personal before work, hard before easy, big picture before smaller details. I think that's the best way to lead a young human that really needs to be led well right now.
Now, younger, longer haul listeners, listen, folks. I hope you heard that. And here's what I'm recommending: that you rewind and you write those down. And if you've not done any type of parent training, any type of investment, encouraging email, and I'm saying on all three of those, blame Dr. Tim Elmore on all three of those.
If they don't work, blame Elmore. That's right.
I mean, if you're old enough that you can get by saying it, great. But I'm saying but say, hey, I was listening to this podcast and he talked to parents and these are the three things he said. Thought we could have a conversation about these three things. And there's a training for you right there and a way that you can encourage, especially if you're one of our younger listeners who does not have kids yet or has not raised teenagers yet.
Yeah.
That would be an opportunity for you to share that. That's really good stuff. Whew, gold.
You mentioned a bit in the book about your messaging to your kids and kind of questioning or when you're communicating to your kids. Okay, there were some questions you brought up about how to evaluate. Are you communicating clearly? Are you communicating healthy things? Like, I don't know. Do you have some suggestions or some guidance even in those, or maybe even just those questions might be enough for the folks who haven't read the book?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'm not remembering if I put this in that section of the book, but I really believe if I'm going to lead well, I've got to be a listener first. So I got to listen, empathize, and guide. Listen, empathize, and guide. So I think our best conversations with our young people is going to be that flow. Which, by the way, is hard for me because I want to talk. Can you tell I like to speak? But I bet you every student pastor out there is liking to speak. Yeah. And I'm saying maybe you need to not speak first, but listen first, and then feel with them, and then say, okay, and now I hope I've earned the right to offer some guidance. So here's a couple of thoughts. And Jody, I'm not sure if this is what you're looking for, but here's the things that are going through my mind. One is I think we need to make a habit of talking about the silver lining. My mom was so good at this whenever we went through hard times growing up. We didn't go through a pandemic. Well, we did. In 1968, I was in the third grade and the Hong Kong flu broke out. And it was a pandemic. But by the way, get this. It didn't even make the front page of the paper. It was a global pandemic. In fact,
it was fascinating reading about that because I had never heard of the Hong Kong flu.
Yeah.
No, me either.
And I was like,
what? We didn't, because the medical profession handled it, not the politicians. And we made our way through it. And we came up with a vaccine. But think about it. I mean, Woodstock happened during 1968 to 1970. I can't believe 400,000 people were partying together in New York. And that's just crazy to me. But anyway, back to my mom. Make a habit of talking about the silver lining. So one of the things my mom did, she would listen when I would complain or mope or, whatever. She made sure I felt heard. But she was so good at saying, now, that's a dark cloud, but there's a silver lining. And she would point it out. Now, a teenager is going to go, oh, yeah, that's whatever. But I think if we do that enough, and it is a habit, we'll condition their brains to do it for themselves. And to be able to, by the time they turn 18, 19, 20 years old, they're finding silver linings. We've got to do this. Here's another thing I would say. Parents out there, break down their hardships into digestible bites in their minds. It's like when our kids are really young, 2 years old, 3 years old, we cut their food up into little bites. And by the way, the younger the child, the smaller the bite would have to be cut into. I think when they get overwhelmed with schoolwork or this chore or that project, and they will get overwhelmed. Right now, they're often flooding. I think we need to say, all right, it's a big project, but let's break it down to doable bites. Here's what you do today. Here's what you do tonight. Here's what you do tomorrow. I just feel like that's huge. Let me share one more quick thought. There's a psychological term that's really helpful. We've got to identify their cognitive distortions and really help them see their distortions. So you guys have probably heard this term, but maybe some of the listeners have not. Cognitive distortions are when we do all or nothing thinking, black and white. Everything's really either really awful or really awesome. And you and I both know that's not true. It's not awesome. We use that word way too much, and it's not awful. So cognitive distortions are when we say, no, wait a minute, what you just said is not completely true. I know you feel that way, Jessica or Josh, and you begin to identify them. And in the book, in the appendix, I try to list, 10 or 12 common cognitive distortions in teenagers that we've just got to call out and not let them go, form that narrative where in 2021 and 2022, they've got this horrible narrative because we didn't guide the forming of that narrative. So I'll stop there and hopefully that's helpful.
This is good. This is good stuff. Here's what I want to do, Jody, if it's okay. I want to jump in for a minute. I have a question related to youth ministry programming.
Okay.
So I'd like to talk about that with you for a second, Tim. But then I want to make sure we leave the last part to talk about playing a part in the student's narrative. So that's where I'd like to head. So here's a quick question though related to programming, and then let's jump into the narrative thing.
Okay.
If it's true that youth ministry is often program based.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think we could probably make an argument that we have been program based for a long, not every, of course there are exceptions.
Yeah.
Mostly though, we could say that we've been program based. What shift do you think needs to take place, if any, in response to the pandemic?
Wow. That probably deserves an hour.
I probably should have sent you that one in advance.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
that would have been fair. But I'm just curious. But you're a youth pastor at heart, and because once you have that in your blood, you've got it, and it's there.
Well, I would say the first thing that comes to my mind there is we probably need to move from program based in our thinking to process based. There's a slight difference. I mean, you may think there's not a difference, but I think there's a slight difference. So I think we put way too much stock in America into events, holding meetings and events and retreats and conferences. We're very event based. That's in many ways, that's kind of what you're saying. Here's this program.
Yes, I think.
Yep.
But if we're process oriented, it doesn't mean we don't need events. I think events are helpful. They catalyze thinking, and maybe we have a prayer conference and we go, oh my gosh, I ought to pray more. That thought is catalyzed. But the process is really where our lives change. Where day in and day out, week in and week out, we continue to discuss and apply what we talked about at that event. So youth pastors, what I would say is, what would you do if you went back to the drawing board? Maybe a good way to say it is if you walked out of the church building and walked back in and said, if I was to start all over, what would I do now? Well, you might do very many things differently. But one of them I would hope would be, what's the process they're going to need to go through to come out on the other side of this as a graduate with an accurate memory and a positive narrative? That's what I'm after. Accurate memory. We were not wearing rose-colored glasses. We realized that was a hard time, but positive narrative. So process-oriented means you're thinking what are the inputs and the outcomes that they're going to need. By the way, another thing in the church we're awful at, we're good at we're good at measuring inputs, lots of activities. We're not so good at measuring outcomes. And that's what Jesus is judging us on. What's the fruit? What's the fruit coming out of your ministry? So I think we need to do that. So that would be what I would say. Process. What's the process they need to go through to grow?
Good. It's great. Well, you really do talk a whole lot about students that ultimately, I feel like one thing that just kind of is sprinkled in throughout the entire book is this idea of the impact we can have on a student's narrative.
Yeah.
As we kind of start to wrap this thing up, what is your heart behind that? And what would you say, what would you want to leave with youth pastors when it comes to the potential impact that we have on their narrative?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question, by the way. It's huge. It's really the biggest idea, I think, that I tried to add in the book. And I don't know if I did a good job, but I tried. So let me tell you what was sparked and then what I think we can do. So my family had a little reunion some years ago, and I was with my sisters. We're all full grown adults, in fact, older adults now, but we were reminiscing about our childhood and the memories we had. So on vacations, boyfriends, girlfriends, all the things that stood out in our memories. But what I noticed from those conversations was my sisters and I had some very similar memories, but many different memories. Even though we grew up in the same home with the same parents, eating the same green beans, very different memories. For instance, my older sister and I have extremely different memories of my father. And that triggered some research on my part. I read a couple of books on the scientific research on memories. You know, memories are not accurate. They are reconstructed. We think they're accurate. But you know the story we've all heard about Uncle Joe who caught that fish that was 10 inches long, and by 10 years later, it's 10 feet long, that sort of thing.
Yep.
Our memories are reconstructed. They just are. So if that's true, our kids are going to come out of this pandemic with a memory. And I'm thinking if they come out without any guidance from us, and it's just negative and, negative. Yeah, just not faith, not hope. Just that was, I'll never recover. I'll never catch up. This was awful. I was penalized. While you could make an argument for that, I don't think that's biblical. So I think the best leaders are going, okay, you're going to have a narrative when this is all over. You're going to remember it. Let's let the memory be accurate. So I would suggest, here's my first suggestion, everybody, make a pro and con list. Sometime at your youth meeting or Zoom call, make a pro and con list from the pandemic so far. And make sure you do pros and cons. So the cons will not be hard. Everybody's going to say, oh my gosh, this sucks, but make some pros. So when you do the cons, everybody's going to say, well, he's being honest with us. He realizes there are negatives. But when you do the pros, they're going to begin to see, oh my gosh, yeah, that's true. That happened and that was a good thing. So now we can capitalize on what the Holy Spirit's trying to do during this pandemic. So once you've done that, I think it's important to begin to tell stories from past generations who did take a horrible disadvantage and make it an advantage. Like I mentioned, Isaac Newton, okay? So you can Google those, and I even put some in the book, stories from people that went through tough times. But here's how we need to end up. We need to end up leading these students with high expectations and high belief. Now, here's the importance of that. High expectations has been proven ever since 1968. Dr. Robert Rosenthal, psychologist, whenever kids are led by a teacher or a leader who has high expectations, they tend to perform better. That makes sense, doesn't it? The kids respond to the expectations of the leader. But since 1968, we've learned that high expectations alone aren't enough. In fact, sometimes adults might level too high of an expectation and the kids start getting paralyzed emotionally. It's that tiger mom that says, you'll never eat dinner unless you master the violin or something like that, the kid just spirals down. So here's where belief comes in. When we begin to articulate, I do expect a lot, and I believe you can do this, we have a powerful combination. And by the way, can I just say the obvious? Don't we see this in Jesus? When he meets the woman at the well or the rich young ruler or whoever, high expectation, kind of harsh, high belief. Oh, that feels good. So let me give you a phrase, listeners, that you can use. Some Ivy League schools, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, got together and they were researching teacher feedback on middle school students. Okay, teacher feedback. So the students had turned in an assignment and then the teachers handed it back with some notes on it in red ink. Never fun. But they were trying different responses to see what would elicit the best effort on the part of the students. The phrase that was number one, that was so good that the researchers said it was almost magical, was this simple phrase: I'm giving you this feedback because I have high expectations of you, and I know you can reach them.
Hmm.
Now, you see the high belief and high expectation? I'm giving you this feedback because I have high expectations, and I know you can reach them. They said, especially for male students, the effort went up as much as 320%. It was crazy. In fact, people of color, males of color, they had never had a male say something like that to them. So I'm just saying, I'm sorry. The words are not magical, but the thought is so Christ-like and it's so magic. And I think the only way we're going to make it through this pandemic with a good attitude is that we say, I so believe in these kids and I expect them to come through. And I'm going to give them assignments that match that expectation. So I'll stop there.
Whew. That's good. That's good.
No, it's really good. I was even thinking as you're talking. So my second daughter, I have 4 kids. My second daughter, when she hit junior high, she kind of breezed through elementary school, got to junior high, and was struggling a bit early in 6th grade, and not failing by any means, but just not living up to what everybody kind of felt. And so we had a teacher conference with one of her teachers, and he said, Anna's grades are fine, they're okay, but I know that she can do better.
Yeah.
And so he literally sat there with her and said, I believe in you and I can see that you're able to do more. And so I'm expecting more of you because I know that you can do it. And I've thought about that conversation a lot the past few weeks, because now as we're sitting here in this pandemic, she's thriving.
Wow.
And now I'm looking at my 11-year-old son who's struggling, similar age.
Yep.
And thinking, gosh, what a pivotal moment that was. And I had not really, even this conversation right now, you saying that just, emphasizes to me the importance of that moment in my daughter's life from that teacher. And I don't know that in the church specifically, we do that well.
Yeah, I think you're right. Can I volley back on that?
Yeah.
I think you're spot on. I think we either do one or the other. We're either really harsh and these kids are lazy slackers, or we're just, we just have compassion and we don't expect much. So we need to be velvet covered bricks. Velvet covered bricks. That's one of our habitudes, the images that form leadership habits and attitudes. So youth pastors, parents listening, velvet on the outside, grace, belief, attention, acceptance. I know, but inside brick, because I believe in you, we're going to expect a lot of you. But that velvet brick is exactly what Jesus was, exactly what we need to be, especially in this time of disruption. Yeah.
Man. Well, Tim, thank you so much. I know we could talk forever about this, and the book is
good.
So good. So good. If you've not yet grabbed the book, I can't recommend it enough to you. We'll put a link for that in the show notes so that you can find it. If folks wanted to follow up and connect with you or find you or other things that you've done, where's the best place for them to do that?
Yeah, thanks, Jody. The easiest and simplest way to find me and our work is growingleaders.com. Growingleaders.com. This pandemic population book is there, but also the habitudes and other books for parents and things like that. So I've so enjoyed being with you guys. I think I'm with people of kindred hearts, and it's up to us to make sure these kids turn out well. So thanks for going after what you're doing.
Tim, thank you.
Appreciate you, man. Thank you so much for your time, and we'll catch you on the flip side, wherever that is.
Okay,
yeah, man, awesome, man. Thanks. Told you were going to want to take notes. Jiminy Crickets, that's good. I don't know why. Jiminy Crickets is like my word for the day. Anyway, man, it was good. Seriously, I love that guy. I've never met him in person.
No, but
I'm a fan.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think one of the things that's interesting, a lot of times when we interview folks, we'll kind of read whatever or have a conversation or watch whatever it is. And I think, there's some really good things here we could pull out and talk about. I was a little nervous on this one, to be honest, because I read the book and there was so much there that I wanted to talk about, and I knew we wouldn't be able to. And it was great.
Well, and I think a lot of people maybe are a little skeptical because it came out so fast.
Yeah.
And at first, honestly, I was like, well, that was fast. But truthfully, I'm telling you, the research, he pulled it off, and he researched it. And I think his heart comes out. I can't think of another interview.
So
I mean, he got emotional at the end, and I think that's because his heart was really in it. And I can't think of another interview where anybody got emotional, not because of something. I mean, we probably made people emotional before, like in a because we're terrible kind of way, but not in a because they actually were passionate about what they were talking about. I loved it. It was so good. So thankful for that.
It was great. Thanks for listening and tuning in today. Make sure you head over to YM360. Check out their stuff as well as AirOSport, and then our brand new sponsor,
Smartphones -101. I don't know why he did that dash thing. I want to make fun of that when I talk to him. But anyway, that's what it is. Smartphones-101.com. And it's an amazing series on parenting and smartphones. Good stuff.
Super helpful. We'll see you guys in the next episode. Peace out.
See you.